This is Iggy Rhodes from the Education Endowment Foundation, and Iggy was actually on the, well, she actually produced the guidance report on behaviour in schools. So we are really hearing from the I was going to say the expert about it. It's not so she would tell me off if I said that. I think it's not so much that, it's about Iggy's the one that read the research and kind of helped put it together. So she's really got kind of underneath it as well. And she also worked very closely with us she was the person that helped us as a research school in the East. And she also spoke in Norwich earlier this year. And I know she's just going to give us a fabulous hour of thoughtful stuff this afternoon. I'll just say that although Iggy's going to be presenting, I'll be keeping an eye on the chat as we go through. So if there's anything that you want to either ask that I can answer directly via the chat, or questions that you want to kind of flag up when Iggy's got various points during the presentation where she'll give you a chance to ask those. So you can either ask those directly or put those in the chat and I'll keep an eye on them. But I shall now hand over to Iggy to start. Thank you, Iggy.
Thanks, Nikki. So hopefully you can see my slides. I'm going to talk you through the evidence report that we've got, and I'll talk through the process to putting that together, and part of the reason for that is so you understand the scope of what that can tell us and how that can help us with teaching, and what it can't tell us. And then I'm going to talk through kind of some of those decisions that you might be making, so hopefully that'll be helpful for you. But first, I think, and this is something to do with the strength of the evidence, I'd like you to start from a point where you're thinking about a strong memory you have of behaviour stopping learning. And so if you can, some people have this memory and some people don't. If you can, I'd like you to think of you being at school and behaviour stopping learning in a classroom. It's not to do with age, but some people remember this big incident and some don't. If not, then, you know, just any time you've been in the classroom as a teacher, just think of a time that, you know, we're not talking a little bit, we're talking about, you know, really learning stopped. I want you to think about these kind of three things. So what was the cause of that? What could the teacher have done differently, even if that was you? And how could the school have been set up differently? I'm going to leave a silence now so you can think about that example. I want you to have one really clear example in your head. Okay, so hopefully you're thinking of a time that behaviour stopped learning at your school. So this is obviously behaviour's gone wrong, and you've in some way suffered either as a student or a teacher. The reason I'm asking you to think of this is that I'll talk through the guidance reports. Some of you will have come across it already, but one of the key points I want to make is that when we're changing our own practice and when we're supporting other teachers at our school to change our practice based on the evidence around behaviour, we're influenced by lots of different things. And sometimes we're influenced by the really strong experiences we've had. And that can be really, really helpful professionally. And sometimes it can steer us away from the evidence. So I'm going to kind of have an activity where we'll think about that a bit later. I think having that experience in mind and thinking about how that fits with the evidence as I talk through the main findings should hopefully help you to use that experience helpfully and not unhelpfully. So first, just a bit of background. Some of you'll know this and it'll be quick, I promise, but I just wanted to let you know kind of who the Education Endowment Foundation is, so you know why I'm speaking to you. So I work in the Central EEF team. We're an independent charity. We focus on educational attainment, particularly of children from disadvantaged backgrounds. And we're with the Sutton Trust, we're the What Works Centre for Educational Achievement. So we got a big pot of money. We were really lucky at the beginning of our lifetime, and we're spending that down over the period of our lifetime. What that means is that we can be independent, as we're not kind of seeking new funding. And some of you will be been involved in EEF trials, or will have read EEF reports. Been 11,000 schools and other settings involved in our kind of trials now. So I know that quite a few of you have come across the EEF already. And the three things that we do, so the top one there, a lot of you'll have come across our teaching and learning toolkit, I think. So we synthesize evidence that exists, that's internationally, studies that have already been done on what teaching methods work most effectively and most consistently. We've got down here evidence generation, so we run trials, we test different approaches to teaching, see what works again most efficiently, effectively, and where it works best. And then down here on the right, we've got evidence mobilisation. So that's what I've done with the report on behaviour, is we've taken the research and we've put it into a guidance report, which is a teacher-facing document. And you'll see that it also in that section is our network of research schools. So Norwich Research School, it's Notre Dame High School, is one of a group of 40 research schools across the country. And just a bit on the process. So I led this process end to end. So I scoped the kind of evidence and looked at what questions we wanted to ask, and then appointed an independent team from Exeter University to review all the evidence that they could find. So they looked at, they were a mixed team from health, psychology backgrounds and education backgrounds, and they looked at evidence looking at targeted interventions, whole class interventions, and processes in the whole school. And then we put that into a report. So I co-authored this, I'm internal at the EEF. I co-authored this with one of our head teachers in the research school, Michelle Long, who's at Dixon's Music Primary in Bradford. And then we've started to kind of hopefully turn it into information sessions like this and training. Okay, so I'm going to whiz through the main findings of the report, and then I'll do a bit of a pit stop for questions. So as Nikki mentioned, I think a couple of people have come since Nikki introduced me, but if you have any questions, if anything doesn't make sense, whack it into the chat function, and we'll have a bit of chance to unpick those. So the first thing, I've got this up on a big screen, but it's probably quite small for you. The purpose of this slide is not for you to be able to read every recommendation, so don't worry about that. But I hope that what you can see is the colour scheme here. So in the blue-green scale, we've got proactive strategies, and these are largely things that you can do before and kind of separate from any incident of misbehaviour. And you've got one little column here, which is the reactive strategies, what you do when things have already gone wrong, or when things are consistently going wrong with behaviour, or being challenging, causing challenges. And I'm going to talk about this one in a little bit more detail later, but the bottom thread, so running all the way throughout this, is a finding on implementation. And so a point I wanted to make with this slide is that when we looked at the evidence, and we had a panel reviewing this of school leaders from primary, secondary and special settings, we found that most of the evidence related to things that you do that are proactive. So I'm going to focus on those first, but I found that a really positive message as someone, I've been a teacher myself, and I found that it was really positive to know that there are quite a few things that can be done that don't have to wait till it feels really hard, and that actually a school can do to support the staff within that school, that aren't all about the negatives. So I'm going to whip through these proactive strategies first. And the first one is, and it's first for a reason, because it came up most in the evidence, is about knowing and understanding your pupils and their influences. I don't think this will come, I mean, when you look at the evidence and you haven't got skin in the game, so you are just reporting the evidence as it is, you're not going to find things that are wildly surprising. I don't think there'll be huge surprises here, but this one, I think, more than any others is probably completely in tune with what you know to be important. But getting to know your pupils first it really makes a big difference to how they support their own behaviours as they go throughout the school. And something I wanted to draw your attention to here is that the findings seem to suggest that every pupil having a supportive relationship with one adult in the school is really, really beneficial. And that's true in a primary as well as in a secondary. And I'll talk through a couple of examples of schools that I have done this in very different ways, in very different sizes of school. It might be done differently in a really small school to a really big one. And actually, you know, in a setting like in most primary schools where you have one teacher with a class, it can be quite easy to know who that adult should be. In a sort of a, you know, an 8th form entry secondary with 15-minute tutor time, that might be a bit more challenging, and a lot of schools would wait until pupils have a problem, so they're expressing a problem with behaviour, or they've started to, you know, really go into themselves and don't seem to have social connections. But the findings here suggest it would be helpful to try to have something in place to understand pupils so that you know what their norm is. So you're really looking out for any changes and can spot those small changes. And so I think that'll come to life a bit more with examples. The second finding was about learning behaviours, and this really fits in with quite a few other EEF guidance reports we've done, if you've read any others. But there were some programs you can teach that are about learning behaviours. You might have fixed separate time in class where you're getting pupils to think about, you know, a learning behaviour is any behaviour that supports learning. So, you know, listening carefully and working well with a teammate and persevering with a task. And it might be the case that you have a curriculum that teaches that explicitly, but actually we found when we were looking into our social and emotional learning guidance report that a lot of schools didn't have the time for that separate, say, like hour a week where they're looking into those things explicitly. But in those cases, putting the time into supporting teachers to change the way they speak in the classroom can have a big impact. So you might not have time to dedicate separately to teaching kids this, but you might have time to do some insets with staff about how they can promote metacognition while they're focusing on their academic tasks, how they can promote teamwork where they're focusing on an academic task where that is a natural fit for it. So it's more about teacher actions. The third strategy is about classroom management. And the thing to say about this is an area where the evidence was strongest. So there were a lot of randomised controlled trials, so really high standard of evidence, where classroom management programmes had made a big impact on students. But what I would say is, so if you're going to train a teacher to be better at managing the classroom, even more than some other things you might train teachers to do, it takes a lot of time, because every teacher makes 100 decisions about behaviour every minute, and they are really minor decisions that become habitual, even more than the way that you ask questions and other things, because you sort of, it's most of it is background. So if you're going to change the way you respond to and encourage behaviours, you're going to need to break habits, and everyone knows that breaking habits is hard. So these classroom management programs, they tended to be like 20 hours of learning. You're talking, half of the evidence, actually, I think 12 randomised controlled trials, all came from the Incredible Years teacher classroom management program. And that's 6 months of doing 1 day each month of training. So, 6 days of training. And that's about typical. So I would say, if you've got a teacher who's really struggling with classroom management, or you have a class that's particularly difficult to manage, or perhaps the school is in a position where behaviour needs a full kind of reset, maybe behaviour is a problem for the school, investing this time in teacher classroom management is going to be worth it, but it's not something to do, you know, just lightly. It might help. It's something to do for the teachers who need it, the classes who need it, the schools who need it. So big investment. And then I put this one next to it, the fourth one, because this is the opposite. So teacher classroom management, if it's gonna be worth it, you want to really invest. But there are also quite a few simple approaches that there were bits of evidence for that I think are worth drawing your attention to. So if you're wanting to improve behaviour, actually just specific behaviour related praise, increasing the use of that seems to be able to have that impact and really improve behaviour in the classroom. So I think that there was a period where, and possibly it's still true for some individual teachers, but I think there was a period where there was quite a bit of overpraising of work, you know, non-specific, that's really nice work, tick and flick, making sure that you've marked and been positive. And there's certainly been big criticisms of that, and rightly so. But with behaviour, I guess one way to think about it is in your personal life, if someone thanks you for doing the washing up and you're washing up your own pans and pots, you don't feel like I shouldn't have been thanked for that. You know, even though it's something that, you know, is basically expected of you. And I think that's true for kids in schools. Actually, oh, thanks for sitting up, thanks for putting your pen down, is completely fine. You can't overdo it as long as it's specific and it's true. So there was one really small study, this isn't great evidence, but I found it interesting, which was by a guy called Cook, and it was in America, but they gave some teachers a really short bit of training, 40 minutes worth of training, about improving their use of praise so that they had a ratio of 5:1 praise to you know, negative comments. And the idea is to think about that, try to think about that on both class level and actually on an individual student level. That doesn't have to be explicit verbal praise. It can be positive and work focused comments and non-verbal gestures. But the 5:1 ratio actually comes from what is supposed to be the perfect marriage, and there are quite a few more studies that show that if you have the ratio of 5:1 in positive and neutral to negative comment, positive to neutral and negative comments with your long-term partner, your marriage is likely to last longer. I've tried it. I'm in my house now. I've only said this when I delivered training outside of my own house. I've tried it. My partner's great, and I still found it really hard. So how you do in a classroom, God knows. But I think that what Cook found was that encouraging teachers to aim at that a bit more and teaching assistants to aim at that a bit more was helpful and did improve classroom atmosphere in a way that meant that there was less low-level disruption across the class. And actually that was it was a small study, but quite a significant finding. It's kind of an hour a day. When you added it up, it's like 10 minutes a lesson. So those are all the proactive strategies. And I'm going to just talk through, I'll show you what I'm going to do. I'm going to talk through these two examples in schools, and then we'll have a pit stop. So hopefully this will bring it to life a bit more. But the simple strategies in that number 4, some of those are called behaviour kernels, and they're things, a really early years example that some of us might know from inside or outside of school is the idea of a timeout. So for young kids, having a neutral conversation that's very, very short, where you say, that was not what we asked for, you need to have a timeout, and then the timeout is exactly their age +1 in minutes, and then when they come back it's a positive, okay, now you're coming back, oh, you're apologizing, great. That's a specific behavior kernel. If you do all of those things together and you don't mess around with the formula, that's supposed to really help with children self-regulating their own behavior when they're young. So one school I visited, Wilbraham Primary, which is in Macclesfield, Fallowfield, sorry, not Macclesfield, it's a different school. They use something that also is in a really long list of behaviour kernels. There's a whole literature on behaviour kernels. I linked to it in the guidance report, but it's also easily Googleable. But one of these is a head teacher star. So the formula is, it needs to be an adult who has a lot of status. In this school, it was their head teacher. it needs to be very public praise, and it needs to be for good behaviour, but behaviour is broad. So behaviour could be worked really hard and produce this piece of work. So it can be related directly to work, or it might be, you know, kindness and supporting other people. And they have another behaviour kernel that they use, and this is the head teacher raffle. So again, formula. Got to be a high status adult, and again they use the head teacher again for this. I swear the head teacher doesn't do everything in the school. Raffle tickets are given by all staff in the school. Oh, sorry, I forgot one in the head teacher star, and that was that the head teacher goes around every class to give out these stars, and the head teacher asks the teaching assistant, the teacher, or any other adult he finds working with a child to nominate someone. So it's also collaborative between the highest status adult and every other adult in the school, which will come up again in consistency later. So anyway, this head teacher raffle tickets are given out really freely for any good things. So they can be quite small things. Maybe the whole class will get one if the whole day they've been acting pretty well. Lots of nice little things. And if you get a raffle ticket, they all go into a big pot at the end of the week, and there's a public draw. So the important factor that high status adult draws it, you don't have a really high chance of winning. That's actually quite important for it. And also, this is pocket money prizes. It's not a high value reward. So it's not about the reward, and you don't feel entitled to it. And that can help with self-regulation of your own kind of behaviours, because you know that it's a good thing. You're getting this nice feeling about behaving well because you get the little raffle ticket, but it's not really closely tied to a big status thing. And the other example I wanted to use was St Mary's Catholic Academy. So they're one of our research schools in Blackpool. And this is just coming back to the point about every child being known in the school. So these are 4 things that the school does to try to get to know their year 7s when they first come in. So you can see top left, they are call home. They do that particularly for ones who, you know, they've got information from primary or from external agencies, and they're hoping to make sure they understand that child well. But also, a lesson's gone well in the first week, teachers will be calling home. Teachers try and make a bit of time within that first couple of weeks to call home for quite a few pupils and just see what's going on at home. Make sure they log the information, get a positive chat with home so that they've got a relationship established. And then that can be especially useful if the parent didn't have a good relationship with their previous school, and actually you're bringing them into the fold. Top right, this is a 2x10 method, and this is just one way of focusing on students who you don't have a relationship with. So sometimes there are pupils who are hard to naturally warm to. Maybe they're very quiet and don't particularly make an effort to have a warm relationship with their teachers. Maybe they're really naughty. It could be a whole range of different things. And what the teachers are encouraged to do is pick a couple of kids that they teach, and a maximum of 2 in any given fortnight, because what you do is try to have a 2-minute conversation every school day for 2 weeks with that pupil. So that might be kids that are in your form as a form tutor, or it might be someone else. But the idea is that's not particularly about work, it's about that kid and who they are. Because if you establish that relationship and that kid has someone they can talk to because you know them a bit better, the conversation flows easier. It's much easier then to have a conversation that's more difficult if something goes wrong. I want to make clear I'm not advertising, but bottom left is the PASS survey, which is something they do. So as a big school, this survey, it's a GL assessment one, and you could use that or design your own or use someone else's. There are lots about. And this is pupil attitudes to self and school. So by getting all the pupils to do this in year 7, they see a sort of bar chart with 9 different elements on of how kids feel about the school, how self-confident they are, how much they think their teachers will help them. And they know some indicators to look out for on that of, actually we thought this kid was feeling quite happy and secure, but it seems like maybe they're not. And that one in particular, I think just having a survey of some sort can be really helpful if you've got a bit of a gap. You know, if you don't have a form tutor that's spending all day like you would at primary, and maybe they've noticed one or two kids that are struggling, but they might not have picked up some kids that are presenting okay but actually have a bit of a problem, and they can be then presented then supported a bit better. And the last thing I've got here is just each child having a real support network around them. So, you know, liaising with the other bodies, particularly with parents, but also with community leaders, police, mentors, counsellors, and making sure you get a full picture. And that's especially for them when they've done this survey and something's cropped up, or, you know, there's been an incident in school, something's cropped up, and they just want to understand that kid a bit better. Oh, okay, so that's whistle-stop tour of the findings. Pit stop now. Are there any sort of questions, clarifications, challenges at this stage?
There's a really interesting point that's come in from, is it Sarah? Do you want me to read it, Sarah, or are you happy to ask that yourself? Let's see if she...
Hi, sorry, I was struggling to unmute there. Happy to ask, actually. A bit in terms of the raffle reward system, some of my wider reading, so I'm sort of thinking about Alfie Cohen and the punishment by rewards, would kind of say that actually you're creating winners and losers and you're not creating any intrinsic motivation. So I do wonder if that's a bit of a quick fix. And when we're looking at kind of behaviour, do we want to create a more embedded sense of kind of intrinsic self-regulation? And I just wondered if while you were looking at that evidence that had come out at all when thinking about it. And also that boys, particularly at secondary school, who I've worked with a lot, hate public praise. You know, there's a significant who will do everything to almost disrupt and undo that kind of praise that you were talking about. Yeah, so that was kind of my point.
I think that's a really, really interesting question, Sarah. So we had this discussion quite a bit as we were writing the guidance report, and I'm sure you would be interested in seeing the kind of earliest draft compared to what it looks like later. And actually, so Michelle Long, who I co-wrote this guidance report with, Dixon's Music Primary, and it's co-located with a secondary school, Dixon's Trinity. They don't use praise, actually. They really avoid it. And so initially when we were writing the section on learning behaviours, we've really focused on this difference between intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. But actually what we found was the evidence that was found in our evidence review actually said that both intrinsic and extrinsic motivation can work when you're trying to get kids to do stuff in schools. And so we didn't want to focus too much on the exclusively kind of, ideally all kids would have intrinsic motivation. And if you've got a school culture that can promote intrinsic motivation so well, you might do what they do at their school, which is wonderful, which is actually they don't have any rewards and the kids are motivated. I talked to them, I checked, and they were, really highly motivated. But there might be lots of reasons to use extrinsic motivation if you're considering the culture, how it's going to fit with other things. You're completely right that an adult telling a teenage boy he's done really well in front of his classmates really might not go down well at all. And it just depends, doesn't it, on your culture. So I think, yes, you want to aim at reducing how extrinsic the motivation is. And that's, kind of what I meant by reducing the size of the prize, reducing the stakes. But there is a place for extrinsic motivation if that's what you need for your culture, I'd say.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Does anybody else want to come in now, either via the chat or just speak? Otherwise, I've got a question I want to ask. I hope nobody minds. I was just wondering, I'm watching this and it's really interesting. I'm just thinking of, as a teacher, rather than someone that's on SLT or, someone that can't effect change, particularly within the school. How much of this do you think is within my gift and how much really depends on the culture of the school and the support from SLT. I mean, I understand that both are important, but what's the balance there?
That's a really good question, Nikki. I'm going to come on to consistency, and it would seem very important and something that often is a frustration for teachers, that actually they're exposed to quite a bit of inconsistency. But when you look at the things that you can change, I think that if you're internally consistent, if that makes sense, I don't mean if you as a teacher are consistent in what you expect from pupils, there is, and I know what a physical classroom looks like is a little bit different this year, and some of you are traipsing around long corridors, I know, and not like usual, but there is, whether the real physical walking through your classroom door or you've walked through their door, I think that there is, pupils really know how to behave for one teacher and what's expected by one teacher, and the difference with another, just the same way that kids know to play their grandmas differently to how they play their mum. So there is quite a lot that teachers can do, but there is a huge responsibility on SLT. So actually, Nikki, for people like you, I'm afraid you've got a double responsibility, both to be consistent as a teacher and to support all of your teachers so that they can have to focus on that consistency less. But hopefully I'll explain that a little bit more. I noticed Amanda's example about footballs being kicked around the classroom. That I think is a really, really strong, vivid picture. That I'm going to come back to that. Okay, I'll move on. I want to talk about consistency. You've segued me right into it, Nikki. So I think mostly I like talking about this because I just found it interesting. But I got the researchers to do an extra bit of research when they finished the original review, because what they'd said was, we've looked at interventions, programs that have been put on in schools. These might be school developed interventions, or they might be an external person coming and training teachers. They said it'd be really useful to know what features of those interventions rather than just which interventions worked. So I asked them to look at those features, and they found two different things seem to support whole school change. So, and I guess this is the thing, that when we're looking, this last bit is about implementation across a school and consistency. But there seem to be two different ways of achieving it, and you might find that it depends on your school context. So the first route is definitely a big investment. It's a big investment route, and this is, it might be that your school has more of an issue with behaviour, or it might be that it's just got to that time. It's been several years since behaviour was focused on, and actually maybe everyone's quite rusty, and you could do with a shared language. Maybe there's been a change in the school. And so there are three elements that you should try and employ together in order to have really successful changes in behaviour across the school. So the first is really focusing on individuals. So I didn't actually focus on this earlier, but when we're talking about reactive strategies, there are two things that are important, and they sound contradictory. And one is that we tailor our approaches to kids who've got more complex and more ingrained issues with their own behaviour. We tailor our approaches to them rather than just having a one-size-fits-all behaviour policy. If you've had 3 behaviour points, you always do this, and then after that you always do this and you always do this. We tailor what happens for them. And the other thing that's important is that what happens for individuals is consistent with what happens with everyone else. And I know those feel like a really big tension, because often when you are supporting someone in an individual way, it might go against what you're doing with everyone else. I think what seems to be really important is that when you are tailoring your approach to individuals, you've got a behaviour policy that allows for that, and it's clear to other pupils why there is a different approach. So, for example, you might generally expect all pupils to sit quietly at their desk. But the rule is that we don't disturb others, and there might be one particular pupil for whom sitting still is really, really difficult, and that pupil has a specific other part of the room that they are allowed to go to at specific times, maybe when they take a card to show that's what they're doing. The other pupils would be able to recognise that, and you're much less likely to get a problem with this is unfair if there's a very clear system. Or it might be that if you do a certain behaviour, you always leave the classroom, but what happens once you've left the classroom is different depending on why that behaviour presented itself in the first place. So you focus on changing your policies to make sure that things can be properly tailored to individuals. That might include specific training. You know, it might be depending on the needs in your school, it might be trauma therapy or training on supporting pupils with autism or something really specific to the pupil needs. There's then teacher training, and this is the teacher classroom management stuff I talked about. So it's probably going to be over 2 terms, 20 hours for some or for all staff, depending on, you know, what the situation is in school. It might only be a couple of staff that need that. And then there's a real focus on relationships. So the teachers, teaching assistants, other members of staff, you get everyone on the staff body really focusing on their relationships with pupils. But the second route that also had really positive outcomes, and you know, you can make some assumptions here about which schools chose this route, was where schools focused. They realised that their behaviour issues, maybe low-level disruption across the school, were actually caused by boredom, by there being kind of bits of the curriculum they either didn't understand or they'd already covered and really, really understood. And so another route could be to focus on these two issues down here. So the first is academic, making sure there's targeted support for kids at the bottom, making sure that kids who've finished all the work have something else to do or are really properly challenged rather than just doing things for the sake of it. And the second is learning behaviours, so putting that onus back on the pupils themselves to you know, behave in a way that supports their own learning, to really challenge themselves, to work as a team, that kind of thing. So I found that interesting, those two combinations, and you might think in your school which position you're in, and certainly I think any individual school, if you looked at it over a 10-year period, might have a time where the top line was right and a time where the bottom line was right. So back to what Nikki was saying, this comes from an Ofsted report on behaviour. So they looked over lots of reports they'd had at 80 different schools where behaviour was you know, noted as a problem by their inspections. And you can see that in over 35 of them, so in nearly half of them, the main area of improvement was behaviour, the consistency of behaviour management. But the one straight down from that was the systems for monitoring behaviour. And when you need to change your systems for monitoring behaviour, the issue with that system is generally that it's being applied inconsistently. So you can see that inconsistency is nearly always the problem when a school has a serious problem with consistency. And, you know, Ofsted can be, you know, very useful, but there are all sorts of issues with just trusting things that come through inspection reports. But this was kind of really reflected in teacher voice surveys. So when primary school teachers were interviewed, they found that 2 in 4, so 50% of primary school teachers said that inconsistency was a problem in how their behaviour management systems were deployed, and that was actually 3 in 4 secondary teachers said that was a problem. So it seems to be quite commonly seen that consistency in how things are implemented is a problem. So, you know, back to Nikki's question, this is really an issue for senior management as well. So overall, when we looked at the evidence in the round, we came up with 4 C's of things that we thought were really important to ensure this consistency. I'll go through those. So those were that when there are big changes to behaviour policy, it's really useful to have those as collaborative as possible. So if you're going to change even something as simple as your mobile phone policy, it would be, you know, if the head teacher is going to make that change, it'd be better if they consulted the SLT. If the SLT is going to make the change, it'd be better if they consulted teachers. If they're all going to make that change, it'd be way better if they consulted everyone, all the other members of staff in the school. And it'd be, again, much better if the pupils had been involved in making that decision and if their parents had been consulted too. You know, you could go even wider, but the more collaborative it is, the more likely you are to get people buying in and doing it. The next step is things being clear. So, you know, if you've got a policy that everyone agreed on, but no one can read, and this is a bit true of, sometimes people have a staff handbook that has rules, the school rules in it, and then there are separate rules for children to read. And I think if your children can't read your rules, it's less likely that those are clear enough in the first place. So maybe you need to relook at them. And these are both really important because of this third C, which is consistency. So if you haven't got your staff to buy into your new mobile phone policy, you'll have what I had in a school that I was a fresh new teacher in, where we had a new rule that we'd hand in mobile phones when we saw them. And I was the first, the second, the fourth, fifth, eighth and ninth teacher to hand in a mobile phone, or you know, because as the newbie in the school, I hadn't realised this policy wasn't going to work and no one else was paying attention to it. The policy itself wasn't wrong, but the way that they'd introduced it meant that no one was buying into it. And if once things start being implemented inconsistently, you know, it's unfair and you get more issues with kids kind of riling against them. And then this last bit is caring. And I think that can often get missed in this talk about behaviour, is that whenever we have a policy about behaviour, the rationale for it is it's supporting children and supporting staff to work in a lovely school. So I'm gonna come back to a policy I think could be all of those. I just want to get a bit of a check first on what your natural inclinations are. So if you've got a mobile phone, I think, well, I checked and you should be able to scan that QR code if you know how to scan QR codes, and you'll be able to fill in. What I want you to do is vote for exactly 3 of these policies. So you have to have 3 of them in your school and not have the other 3 in your school. If you don't have a phone on you, or you don't know how to scan a QR code, that's fine. Just go to menti.com and it'll ask you for a code if you go to that. So menti.com, and then your code is just written there. So 6150675. Hopefully you can see that. And yeah, I'm going to get you all to vote on that. I can see some sort of faces that look like they're typing, so I'm taking that as a positive sign. Now, where can I move you? I'm moving you there so I can have a look at it. And I'll give you a few more seconds to think. So, hoping this is a tough choice for some of you. I think that one of them might feel a bit of an easier choice than it used to. And if you've tried both of those and you just can't do it, don't worry. You can just think of it in your head. Know what you were thinking. I had a back way into seeing the results, but I've lost it, so I'm gonna go the long way. Oh, hopefully I'll see it on my phone. Sorry, I'm getting you back so I can see all your faces again. It's a bit disconcerting. So, can I see it on my phone now? Where is it on there? Oh yeah. View the results. We'll have a look at what this group is like compared to others. Interesting. So let me share this. So I'll share screen 2. So hopefully you can now see the results. Does that work?
Yeah, we can. And Iggy, someone's just asked quickly, is Menti free? Is it something that's free?
Completely free. Yeah, have a look at it, check it out. I thought this might act, again, I'm not advertising Mentimeter, but I think it's good. I'm not being paid. So in this example, we had, you know, 3 really popular answers. So if you had to pick exactly 3, it was definitely most popular to have a behaviour reward chart. We had a whole school uniform day if there's 100% attendance over the half term, and we've got inclusion rooms. But we've got pupils sat in rows. It's really sad that not many people like that, because I know a lot of you are having to do that at the moment. Adults shouting, always unpopular, and silent corridors, the least popular of all. That's really interesting and actually works really well for what I've got planned next. So, oh, there we go. Share that. You can see the voting again. The reason that I wanted to bring this up, and this is again what I mentioned at the start, and why I asked you to think about your own classroom experience where behaviour really stopped learning. All of those things, all 6 of those things, are areas where there is some evidence, but there isn't evidence that would fully dictate your policy. There isn't resounding kind of evidence that any one of those things is really essential or should never ever happen in a school. I think, you know, the closest to there being evidence, all of them have some evidence that could count one way or another. I think the shouting one being the most tenuous, but actually there's a safety thing there. Adults sometimes shouting at children can be quite helpful if there is a big safety problem, if it's, you know, short bursts. So the thing I want us to think about there is the distinction between the things that make us go, oh no, I just can't do that, and then the balance of probability of what's going to work in school. Because some things that we think, oh, I just can't do that, are crucial to creating a good school culture, right? And it doesn't matter that there's, you know, whether there's intervention evidence or not, it just doesn't matter. You need to create a good culture in your school. You're going to stick to that line. But some of the things that make us feel like that could take us away from the evidence. It's worth considering where your biases might be, and think about that that incident you had in your head. Does that bias you one way or another? Does you know, are you particularly prone, for example, to thinking someone calling out with an insult to another child is particularly bad because you know that really ruined a particular kid's day one other time? So I'm going to now defend silent corridors, not generally, but specifically. I think that they can work sometimes. And the way I'm going to defend them is by going back to those 4 C's I mentioned. And the reason that I'm doing this isn't to promote all of you using silent corridors, but it is to get you to think about where using these 4 C's is more important and where just adopting a policy is more important. So the first thing is collaborative. I went into a school where the Year 8 children had just filled in a survey about what they wanted to change in their school. We were on the top corridor where there were 2 corridors. There was a staircase up and a staircase down. It was very clear. The corridors and the staircases were narrow. You could see why they had that rule. And I went there just after break to talk about these survey results. And suddenly we were all crammed into one side of the staircase because the teacher was walking down the up staircase. And actually, as it came out in the survey results, one of the key things they didn't like was that corridor. And one of the things they wanted was for the teachers to obey the same rules the students did, because actually it was much safer for them if everyone only went one way on the corridor at those really busy times like break. So that policy was then changed, and it was changed in a collaborative way. Actually, it was driven by the students, but the teachers all agreed to it. So I felt that the corridor change in rule there was collaborative. That's not a silent corridor, but I wanted you to know about the kind of way that one happened. Another one is things being clear. So a silent corridor, actually a school I worked in, was a very long corridor, and break times were staggered. I'm sure a lot of you have break times staggered at the moment, but they were already staggered there. All of the classrooms tended to have their doors open because we had a lot of visitors at that particular school. And so what the rule was that students were silent in that corridor, because otherwise they would likely be disrupting learning. Now, it's possible that on one day all the doors were closed, or all the other students were out at an assembly for some reason and the other class wasn't. But it was a really, really clear rule. You're just silent in that corridor. And the students actually had said that they preferred that clear rule rather than saying between the hours of X and Y, you're silent in that corridor. They prefer to just be silent in that corridor. So again, there's a thing about how you create the rule, but also about how clear that rule is compared to others. And obviously you don't want clarity at the expense of all other things, but it can be good. A third thing is about consistency. How consistently can that rule be applied? Are you going to get people pushing back against that rule and therefore it not being applied? And in this case, the two cases I've mentioned, actually, because of the first two being there, it was really consistently applied. And the last thing is about caring. So I hope that the two examples I've used, and one's actually about those lines on the corridor and making sure you go one way. The other's about it being silent. I hope you can see that the students knew that was being done for a reason that was about them and them being safe and them being able to learn, respectively. So that's my little defense of silent corridors. Hopefully you can see that that's not about that being the right policy, but it's about those four things being your test. So time for any other questions on that in the chat, or speak up.
None in the chat, but is there anyone that wants to say something at this point?
I can see Amanda's got her hand up. Go on. Oh, you're on mute.
Hi. As part of some of my CPD, I did a work placement and some kind of work experience, if you like, in one of our local high schools. And they had a very, very strict approach to their behaviour. Some of the methods used to kind of hit the press quite a lot around here in terms of how strict they were. But I have to say, having spent most of my time working in a high school and then going to do a week's work experience in this school, they certainly did have silent corridors. Corridors were very organised. The students had to carry a bag, bags on their shoulders. Nobody was allowed to talk to each other. All the staff were out on the corridors kind of monitoring it. And a lot of the students seemed to feel, I picked up from them that they felt quite safe in the corridors.
Oh, okay.
Whereas before, when I had been, because I assess in different schools, I have students in schools that we assess, teaching assistants, and I have assessed in this particular school several times before, and it really was quite challenging environment, and particularly those corridors. So under the new headship and the new kind of leadership, if you like, and their new policies and procedures, I have to say that silent corridors really did seem to work and make the children feel safe.
That's interesting. Thanks for sharing that experience, Amanda. It seems that the children hadn't felt safe in the corridors previously, and that was the driver. And that is certainly, you know, it is something, it's not common to all schools, but corridors are the least safe parts of schools, you know, on a national level. So in some schools that is a problem. I think that that's a really good example of where the driver was right. And certainly if you go into other schools where children have lovely conversations about their weekend and about their work in the corridors, it would be completely inappropriate to institute the same policy. But yeah, I think that's a great example of where it could work well.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it seemed to work well for the school anyway.
Yeah, brilliant. Now, if there aren't any other questions, I was going to just kind of mention a bit about your kind of opportunities to do more in-depth training. I don't know if I put anything else in here. Oh yeah, no, it's this, perfect. So the behaviour guidance report has been turned into some training. And if you are interested in doing training, you know, it was a 3-day training program, which now will be turned into, you know, on the assumption that there won't be much face-to-face training happening this year. You know, it'd be around 9 modules that would be remote. So if you're interested in doing that, get in touch with Susie, who sent you your joining instructions today. And just something else that, you know, particularly as a response to COVID-19, but it was something we were thinking about anyway. Our colleague Kirsten Mould has created this programme on learning behaviours, which links the behaviour guidance report with 4 other key reports. So you see they've got metacognition, parental engagement, send and sell. And we've also, so we've got a modular programme on that. So again, it's 9 modules, and a module is 2 hours. So, you know, you do 2 hours on a few different days to have a sense of how you might look at all of those things together to support pupils with their learning behaviours. I think that's all I wanted to talk to you about. That's it. Look, I've got thanks for your time at the end. So do shout up if you have any questions or if I've missed anything. Oh, that was the thing about Menti. Oh, and you can see here that Nikki's put an animation in the chat. I would recommend that you watch that. It's great. That's on learning behaviours. I like it anyway. Always hard to tell if it's sort of a, you know, me-centric view of the world because I'm into this sort of stuff, but I think you guys might like it too. And yeah, we talked about the raffle rewards.
Thank you, Iggy. And yeah, and I think if you go back to the Pentagon again, because Kirsten was working on this for a long time, because she came in at this, she's a Senko in her school, and she's actually in a cross phase, she's in a middle school, so she works with effectively what we would call kind of primary phase and secondary phase, and she was really, you know, determined that none of this happens in isolation. You know, behaviour doesn't happen in isolation. Learning behaviours are a whole host of things that lead into it, and that's where that Pentagon comes from. So it's a lovely kind of lead into it. Thank you so much, Iggy, for your time. It's been lovely to actually be able to sit and listen to you talking about it, and have a lovely evening, everybody. Is there anything you